Did you ever wonder who decides if that vacant plot will turn into a church, grocery store, home, or stay vacant? Who is that person telling you that your new lake home needs to be further from the shore, or that your new shed will be too close to the property line? You would be talking about a city planner, or urban planner. They are the people who issue permits and make decisions using geography and statistics to make sure the city works in its best capacity. They make solutions for growing populations, population concentration, displacement, and education. Welcome to the Career Chronicles podcast, and thanks for listening. I'm your host, Jade, and today I have with me Jacob Nosbush, who's a city planner in Todd County, Minnesota. We go over things that he does on a daily basis, what he went to school for, and maybe some things that could help a future city or urban planner get into their field and feel as confident as they can be. All right, welcome to the first episode of the Career Chronicles podcast. My name is Jade Grundy, and tonight I have with me a special guest, Jacob Nosbush. Say hi, Jacob.
Hello.
All right, so Jacob is our first guest, and the first thing I'm going to ask is, what is your job title? What do you call yourself?
My job title is Planning and Zoning Specialist.
All right, so first, do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, how old you are, where you're from, where you went to school, and how long you've been in your current position?
Yeah, I am 22. I just recently graduated from the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, just back in May, and I have been at my current position in Todd County, Minnesota, which is central Minnesota, for just about 3 months now.
Very cool. How are you liking it so far?
I'm absolutely loving it. I love that it's new things each day. It's not the same day every day, and you never know what it's going to be.
That sounds like a great thing to be happy about. So what did you go to school for? You said you just graduated.
Yes, I was a geography major in college.
Okay. Do you feel like it prepared you pretty well for your job?
I think it did. It focused a lot on how people and the environment interact with each other, more so than just maps, like a lot of people think geography is.
Okay, that sounds great. And then, so tell me exactly what you do in your job. What are you responsible for, your function for Todd County?
Well, since it's an entry level position, I'm responsible for a lot of the lower level, like building permits, some of the simple uh, land changes, which I guess I can go into more a little bit later, and handling some of the customer service side and answering phones and relaying messages and requests, sometimes to some of the higher ups in my office should it need that.
Well, that sounds like you're fitting in pretty well there. So let's go back in time a little bit. When did you first know that this is something that you wanted to do?
Well, I've been a map nerd my entire life, pretty much. I've always been a fan of browsing atlases, and so I've known that I wanted to do something that had to do with geography for most of my life. Um, but in high school, a close friend and mentor was asking me about what I wanted to do, and asked if I had thought about going into city planning um, as a career, because he had also majored in geography when he was in college a while back, and knew some people in it, and just thought that my personality would fit in it as somebody who really enjoys um, the personal connections that people have with their homes and their land and that stuff.
Okay. So when you talk about geography and its relationship to people and how that goes into city planning. Tell me a little bit about what that means for you and what you could possibly end up doing in the future.
Well, there's a big part of the job with, and the reason that the permits that people have to get from our office and offices like ours are to maintain an orderly expansion and growth of development in whatever area it is that we serve. In my case, the county, um, to keep lakes from being way too overcrowded, to keep roadways, the areas around roadways clear and safe for people traveling, and the like. And then if in for people in similar positions, but in cities, that then expands to being closer to streets, closer to neighbors, things like that.
You mentioned lakes. Do you work at all with the DNR? Do you know, is there any relationship between your two practices?
Yeah, we do interact with them. Typically, the DNR, the way we kind of describe it is that the DNR handles things that are in lakes, and we handle the things that are around lakes. So um, we don't interact. I guess we interact with them, but we don't truly work hand in hand with them a ton. Though we do correspond with them on uh, problem areas, I guess.
Okay. And so Minnesota has a lot of lakes, right?
Hmm. Yes, just a few.
Just a few. So in school, do you feel like they prepared you, or was there any type of other like education, I guess, for Minnesota lakes, but places that you may have ended up that might have had like more rivers or mountains or coastal areas like saltwater and things like that? If there was, I mean, anything like that in your schooling.
So in schooling, I guess they didn't truly focus on planning and zoning on its own, but instead focusing on just geography in general and how every place is an entirely unique set of circumstances. No two places are truly the same, and that extends into planning and zoning, where every single person who calls you on the phone or walks into your office has has a unique story, a unique place associated with them, and can be treated as such. And that's part of what I really enjoy about it, is that it keeps my brain stimulated by, this is different from this other case I had at a different time. This is similar to that in this sense, but it's different in all these other senses, where every single thing is so unique.
Were there any other majors that you considered for going into city planning, or is there one that they kind of specifically look for, like geography?
Geography is one of the more popular kind of general ones. Some bigger schools have more specialized um, majors, but geography is kind of the general one. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything that with that you felt you could have been prepared for better going into this type of position?
Um, I guess for me personally, I kind of wish I would have been a little better at some of the customer service type of things, though that certainly wasn't something I could have expected them to teach me in school by any
Yeah.
by any means. So, but outside of that, I think it's not a career choice that a lot of people typically think of, because it's I mean, it's fairly small. There isn't a it's not a I don't work in a huge office, and there's offices for every city and county, and some townships have it, um, but it isn't a position you hear a lot about.
Yeah, it's something that I had never heard about until I met you. So that's kind of what piqued my interest in getting to chat with you about it.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that it's not something that a lot of people are looking at as a career choice. Do you think it's a career that needs more people? Do you think?
I think I was one of like 8 or 10 people who interviewed for the job. Um, in terms of the amount of people in it, I honestly don't know of a lot of other people um, coming out of college that go into it.
Um, Jumping back just a little bit, you mentioned that you wish you had some more customer service education experience. What kind of customer service are you doing, and that you could have possibly gotten more experience in maybe a certain field or type of store or something like that?
I think it's one skill in particular that really jumps out to me. It's the ability to to change directions on a dime, and I mean that in like you could be working on a building permit for somebody, and the phone will ring, and you pick it up, and you got to be ready for anything, whatever that person is going to throw at you. A question about any sort of permit, a question about a piece of property somewhere, and what about it, wanting to know about a septic system. It could be just about anything. So being able to stop what you're doing, pivot, answer a question, and go back to that without having a noticeable lapse in whatever it is you were doing in the first place, and not to miss things. That's been the biggest thing. It's taken a lot of getting used to. Is I'm working on this, but I got to go up. I got to talk to somebody, and help
Mhm.
them, and come back to it. Just it's so quick sometimes.
So there's some time management
Hmm.
and people management that goes into that.
Definitely, because sometimes you'll get somebody on the phone who's just really chatty, and you got to kind of work the conversation. Like, all right, I gotta get going. Things like that.
Mhm.
Those sort of interpersonal skills to manage your time well are very important.
So would you say that's a quality that would help someone out going into this field?
Definitely. The ability to have a high amount of attention to detail, um, to, like I said, notice and make sure you're not missing something when you come back to what you were originally working on. It could be after an hour, um, even just today. Um, I was, in the middle of researching something and went to the counter to help a couple people, took a couple phone calls, and it was about an hour and a half before I got back to that, and I had to refresh myself quick. Okay, where was I? What was I doing? What have I done? What haven't I done on this list already? And then continue on with that without wasting a ton of time on it.
Sounds like it definitely keeps you on your toes.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned that you are in the office and doing office type things. Are there times where you'll be out in your county? Is it more of a stationary job, office type thing?
My job personally is virtually entirely office. But if I have the chance to move up to a planner position, that's the more standard level um, career. The standard level job in this career path. There would be a lot more opportunities to be out in the field for at least some of the time on a near daily basis during the summer, at least. Yeah, and then in the winter time when it's not the building season, here in Minnesota at least, to review the ordinance book, or um, get people prepared to get permits for the upcoming summer.
Okay. And then what does moving up look like in that kind of position? So it seems like you're in kind of an entry level position, just coming out of college.
Hmm.
And then are there a lot of positions to move into? Is there a lot of steps on that ladder? Is there something that you kind of have set as a goal?
There really isn't actually a huge ladder, um, in the terms of where there is, unless you consider moving to a different location part of the ladder, which I really don't. Uh, in my office personally, there is basically two steps above me. There's the two planners, and then there is the director who's in charge of the office. So I definitely want to at least get into one of those planner positions eventually, and so then that would look like more some of the tougher questions, about the what are so we have to follow what we call an ordinance, which is a set of rules related to the placement of businesses, houses, anything. It covers everything you could want to build or do in the county essentially, and we have to essentially determine the legality of it and how to permit that. Um, so some of the tougher questions then to for some of the gray areas about what's legal and what's not. How large is this campground allowed to be is one that's been prominent in our office lately. How many sites is it allowed to have, and what do they do for a septic system? So some of the tougher questions like that would be to the planners, some of the higher level people, than it would be just for me, where I would get a building permit for a shed or something much simpler like that.
Okay, so it goes from kind of the more typical things you're doing to the more changing and
Mm-hmm.
possibly.
Yes, the things that would have a larger overall, the things that would have a larger impact or could have a larger impact on the environment, on the people or the people around it, would likely get a much more intense scrutiny from our office than a farmer building a pole shed.
Yeah, I never would have thought about the difference that how many campsites a campground could have
Yeah.
if that would make such a difference, but
Hmm.
it must.
It's well, part of it is this particular campground that we've been dealing with lately is it's right next to a lake. So if you have 20 campers there parked right next to this lake every night for the entire summer, every time it rains, that's that much more rain that is put towards the shore of that lake in a different way than it would naturally, and looking at how that affects that. And then on top of that, you have what happens to all of the bathroom stuff from all of those campers. Where does that all go? And have making sure that the septic systems, and that's a big thing we deal with as well. Septic systems are up to code and not polluting that lake as well.
Okay. So is that something that you definitely feel helped a lot in schooling, was learning about like rainwater runoff and
Hmm.
things like that?
Yeah, yeah, that stuff and the the effect that has environmentally. That was a big thing. Yeah.
So it sounds like you may or may not have kind of a typical day. You're in the office, but always changing things up.
Hmm.
Are there any things that you do every single day?
Yeah. The like I mentioned, the building permits. That's by far the most common thing that I do in our office is I for whatever building it is, if they're adding on to a house, like I said, building a pole shed, building whatever it is, that most of that comes through me, and I handle multiple of those each day. At least it has been over the course of the summer. Um,
Hmm.
it's most likely going to slow down in the winter, though.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're in Minnesota. I mean, you haven't been in the position over a winter yet, but have you heard about how things are going to change over the winter? Does it slow down
Mm-hmm.
significantly?
Yeah, it slows down. It slows down a lot in terms of people applying for permits. Um, But what we do instead then is organize things from the previous year, prepare for year coming forward and we look at our ordinance book, which is the book of rules that we live by, um, and we look at it and say, hey, maybe this rule about a house needing to be 100 feet from a road or whatever, whatever it is, maybe
Mhm.
this rule should be changed for this reason. A example of that we're considering is looking at how things like Airbnbs and VRBOs and the like are, whether we need to have a way to make sure that the septic systems for those houses that are being rented out can handle the amount of traffic that would be in there if that VRBO or Airbnb was rented on a regular basis. It's a lot of behind the scenes work, is what it is.
So, is there permitting that comes with Airbnbs or the VRBOs that they
There,
have to let you know?
there isn't right now, and that's kind of part of what we're going to consider, is should there be? Uh, should we be keeping track of this so that we know to check on those septic systems more often, or know that there's going to be more people in that house? Because if you know how like an Airbnb works, they say, oh, this house can fit 5 people, but that's because it has two double or two queen beds and a couch,
Mm-hmm.
versus for a septic system, that same house could be sized for 1 bedroom because that's where those two queen beds are. And that'd be a much smaller septic system that maybe couldn't handle having 5 people staying in it on a regular basis throughout the year. So a lot
Okay.
of considering things like that as things that could be problems in the future and trying to head those off at the pass before it becomes an issue someplace.
Yeah. So, what is something that you wish you knew before you started down this career path?
Well, I wish I knew how unique every county is. All these different permits I've mentioned all have different requirements that they have to meet to build them. But if you went next door to Morrison County, where Little Falls is, they have entirely different rules. Maybe that same house that you were allowed to build here in Todd County, 120 feet away from the lake, if you were to build that in Morrison County, maybe that wouldn't be allowed. It might have to be 150 feet from the lake. Just there's so many subtle variations, from place to place, and it's amazing to see. But that also causes, it's part of the reason I have a job, because there's so many little nuances like that part of what our job as an office is to do is to help people understand those so that they can comply with them.
And how often do those things change? You mentioned you were looking at possibly changing the one with the Airbnbs. Is that a pretty common thing that happens?
The ordinance, I would say some part of it gets changed most years, if not every year. However, in ways that would be noticeable, I would say not super often. Uh, More often than not, the bigger noticeable changes would be adding in something like the Airbnb one I mentioned, like be adding in something like that to to stop something from becoming a problem in the future. Is part of what it is, and it's so kind of the gist of everything is to keep tabs on everything that's going on to make everything grow in an orderly fashion rather than having one stick out like a sore thumb.
What do you find most enjoyable about your career currently? And then looking towards the future, what are you looking forward to?
I think, well, I'm kind of like I mentioned before. I like that it's new things every day, even though uh, overall I'm doing the same sorts of things. Um, I I mean, every single piece of property is completely unique and could have a whole separate set of potential barriers or unique set of circumstances surrounding it, and I really enjoy learning about the little things that make all of these unique. And that's kind of what has always fascinated me about geography, is the uniqueness of places and things like that.
Yeah. I bet you get to meet a lot of interesting people.
Oh yes, oh yes. I plenty of stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And then with this being such a current topic, how has COVID-19 affected your job, the prospects of, how things are going with customers? Um, is that making things any more hard than it might typically be?
Well, I don't have a ton of comparison because I've started this job since the pandemic set in, but I guess in talking to coworkers, there's a significant amount more of people mailing and emailing in applications for permits than there would be for somebody walking up to our counter. Uh, there's been a decent amount of it now that it's reopened in a limited, in a semi-limited capacity, but I guess in the past there was a significant amount more of people coming up to the counter, and as a result of that, the you kind of have a little bit less pressure when you got the piece of paper sitting in front of you and you don't have to do it. You know, when someone's there, you kind of like, all right, I'm gonna work through this a little quicker because I don't want to make you wait. Versus like if you have a piece of paper, oh, the mail goes out at 1 o'clock tomorrow. I don't have to get this done right now. I could do something else for an hour, come back to this. So you have that. So that is one good thing that's come out of it, is that you have a little more flexibility with your time, I guess.
City planners determine the best way to use a city's land and resources. They may help draft legislation, plan the construction of new public housing or buildings, help protect the environment, and suggest zoning regulations for private property. City planners may choose to specialize in transportation planning, community development and redevelopment, code enforcement, or environmental and urban design. However, those who specialize must keep the bigger picture in mind when creating plans for the city. Median pay for planners in the United States with a master's degree is about $74,000 a year, or $35.75 an hour. In the next 10 years, city and urban planning is expected to grow by 11%, which is very fast when compared to 5% for other jobs, and adding about 4,200 jobs to the field. Pay and outlook vary by state, and all of this info is for the U.S. Planning.org is home for the APA, the American Planning Association, and the AICP, American Institute of Certified Planners. This is also a great resource for job seekers in this field and a place where students can look at schools and certifications they may need in the future. Thank you for listening to the Career Chronicles podcast, a podcast where I hope to educate and inform people who are interested in learning about other jobs and career fields that they may not have been aware of. I'm your host, Jade Grundy, and I want to say a very special thanks this week to our very special guest, Jacob Nosbush, and my very own sister, Macy Grundy, who has been my biggest supporter through all things in life, but especially my newest venture, the Career Chronicles podcast. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at the Career Chronicles, as well as my personal account, JadeFlorence95, on Instagram. If you or someone you know has a cool job that you would like featured on the podcast, you can DM me on Instagram or send me an email at thecareerchronicles@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.